Hey, Texas Study students. This is Coach Science, welcoming you back to another one of our video lessons. Today's video lesson is chapter 12.3 and a new western border. In today's video lesson, we're going to be talking about how Texas got its current day borders, as you can see by the arrow that's following along the screen. Now, the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, which gave that was between the United States and Mexico, gave lands west of Texas to the United States. Now, but what this did, this also created a dispute over Texas' western border and all the lands within Texas. Now, the Texans felt that their border should be all the way up here into Colorado. The Texans felt and wanted to keep the western border that they had here that ranged all the way up to Colorado like they did when they were a republic. That's what they wanted to keep. But this would place half of New Mexico, as you can see here, in the state of Texas. Now, if you remember correctly, in Mayor B. Lamar's presidency, when he had the Santa Fe expedition, those people of Santa Fe did not want to be any part of Texas, right? So this continues to be the story here. These people want no part of being inside of Texas, and this is the dispute that we see ourselves in now. Now, in the year 1847, Texas tried to strengthen its claims to New Mexico by creating counties that included Santa Fe and El Paso. Santa Fe, New Mexico is located about right there, and you can see El Paso located on the map there. Now, kind of just like the Santa Fe expedition earlier in the Lamar presidency, Texas was only able to convince the people of El Paso, as you can see here, to agree to become part of Texas. The people of Santa Fe, once again, did not want any part of them being inside of Texas or known as Texans. Now, one of the disputes over how far Texas extended to the western added to the controversy over slavery. Now, if you remember, here we see Texas again in this issue of slavery. Texas was denied annexation to the United States in its first attempt because they were a slave state. Now, because of that, Texas was a slave state. Many Americans wanted to limit its state borders so that the slavery would not spread out further into the United States. Now, here in this map, we can see the slave population of 1840, right? And how the slaves mainly were in the big city areas of Texas at this time, right? Now, the one thing that the United States feared was that slavery, because Texas was a slave state and people were moving out west, that slavery would spread westward and it would become a trend for other states neighboring it. Now, one way that Senator Henry Clay offered to settle this dispute was he offered a compromise. Now, a compromise is when two opposing sides can come to certain agreements and each side gives up a little bit of something to meet in the middle. Now, with that, U.S. Senator Henry Clay offered a compromise that would propose the immediate admission of California, which was this state right here, into the United States as a free state. A free state is a state where slavery is illegal. Now, if you look at this map gives us a sign and shows us which ones were the free states, which is the green all the top up here, and California, right? And which ones are the slave states. The slave states are the blue ones down here. Another thing that Senator Henry Clay proposed was that the organization of the New Mexico and Utah territories, which you can see here in this map, which the New Mexico territory was the southern part and the Utah territory in the northern part, right? Now, what these two territories would do is that they would decide on their own if they were going to follow slavery. He was going to leave the decision of either becoming a slave state or a free state up to the organizers of these two territories. Now, another one of the things that Henry Clay added to the compromise, right, would be that the slave trade in Washington, D.C., the nation's capital, it would be abolished. That means to be no more, to be stopped and not be enforced in Washington, D.C. but that the fugitive slave law would be enacted. Now, later on in class, we will be discussing the slave trade and how that worked. But what Henry Clay, what he wanted to do was to remove the slave trade in the capital. Now, just to give you a brief, quick overview, the slave trade is like an auction, okay? Like those car auctions you see, and where the people are just raising their hand. That's how it would work. They would go and they would look at slaves, and they would buy them. They would sell them to the best bidder, right, to the highest bidder. Now, what Henry Clay wanted was that, boom, the auction in Washington, D.C. be removed. But with this compromise, he required that the fugitive slave law would be enacted. That means enforced. That means that this law required Americans to help policemen in capturing runaway slaves in order to be returned to their owners. Now, to give you a better idea of what the fugitive slave law was, this is what it was. Now, as you can see in this map, down here were the slave states, and up here are the free states, right? Washington, D.C. is right about that area right there. Okay, so no more slave act there. All right, put an X through that. But, of course, the slaves were down here in the slave states, right? And they wanted to get up here to the free states. Now, the northern states did not need slaves because they had different ways of making money than the southerners that depended a lot on the labor that the slaves provided, right? So if a slave was to come north and come up here, or anywhere up here, it was the duty and the law for an American citizen living in the north to let the policeman know of any illegal slave coming through, or of any awareness of slaves coming through, and let them know. That was the fugitive slave law. Now, another thing that Senator Henry Clay asked for, or I should say called for, was for Texas to give up 40% of its western lands in return for $10 million. Now, this offer would greatly help the Texans pay the debt that they owed from the Texas Revolution and from Lamar's miserable presidency. Now, if you remember, that was a total of $7 million. Now, although it may seem that they are losing up to 40% of their lands, with the $10 million that they will be receiving, the Texans are going to be able to get out of debt and be able to have some spare money in return for their state. Now, let's take a look at the map here that shows us what exactly the 40% was that Henry Clay was asking for them to give up. Now, if you look at this map, this orange part right here was part of the old Republic of Texas. This was the land that Henry Clay was asking Texas, the 40%, to give up in exchange for the $10 million. Now, with Henry Clay proposing all of these deals inside the compromise, the U.S. Congress decided to pass the Compromise of 1850. And inside of that Compromise of 1850, California became a state, New Mexico and Utah became territories, and remember, they were going to choose if they wanted to be a free state or a slave state, and the slave trade was ended in Washington, D.C., and the South received its fugitive slave law that would go across the United States. Now, for the Texans, they accepted the Compromise of 1850 and giving up 40% of their land for, in exchange, the $10 million. And with the acceptance of this deal, we have the borders that are still used till today. These are the current borders, as you can see here, that we have today. And this is how Texas got its unique Lone Star shape. Now, let's go ahead and review one more time what the Compromise of 1850 was. So, once again, Texas gives up 40% of its lands, which was right around here, to give itself its present shape, all right? And in return, they get $10 million and helps them pay off their debt, okay? California gets accepted into the free states and joins them and becomes a state in the United States, the territories of Utah and New Mexico are agreed upon to become a territory in the United States. They will be free to choose if they want to be a free state or a slave state. And second to lastly, Washington, D.C. loses its slave trade, the right to have a slave trade, so no slave trade in the capital. And now, lastly, the South gets everything they wanted. If a slave happens to run away north, it is the duty of the Americans to capture them and help the police capture them and send them back to their rightful owners. This concludes our video lesson on Chapter 12.3, A New Western Border. This is Coach Science, signing out.